Hello and welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite, and this is our second EXTRAsode, where I'm going to be covering my top 10 solo games for 2018. Now, to be clear, this is a little bit different than what we normally do on this show. Normally, we try to release an episode every 2 weeks where Carter and I get together and we talk about the solo games news and we review one solo game in depth, and it's a great fun time. Everybody loves it, right? Well, this is a little bit different. For the last couple of weeks, we've had some illness and surgery in my family and in Carter's, and so things have been just a little bit nuts around our place. So since we didn't want to throw off our usual every other week schedule for getting new episodes out, we decided instead that I would do this EXTRAsode this week, and then next week you'll have another new episode, which will be a normal one where we'll go on an in-depth review of Barbarians: The Invasion. So come back and listen to that when you get a chance. But for now, I want to go ahead and do something that we've talked about doing for a little while now, and many of you have requested. We're going to talk about my top 10 solo games. Now, Carter's just recently started playing solo games, so he doesn't have quite enough experience with it yet, I think, to make a really solid top 10 list, because most of the solo games that he's played for this show, and we're only 16 episodes deep at this point. So we'll give that one just a little bit more time. Don't worry, though, we will make sure that Carter does a top 10 list, maybe this time next year, just so that you can get a feel for how his tastes and mine differ, and maybe you line up more with Carter's thoughts. As a general rule, you could use his thoughts as a guide to find a game that would work well for you. But for now, you're just stuck with me. So before we get started in that too much, though, I should say my tastes have changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. I have always enjoyed games that give me a lot to crunch on and think about, and I've always generally preferred big box games to smaller, lighter stuff. And that's still mostly true. But now that we have a couple of kids at our house and my job has gotten pretty crazy, I find myself often wanting to play something just a little bit lighter, something that I can knock out without falling asleep at my table in the room where I play solo games, because that has happened really an embarrassing amount lately. And so I find myself changing just a bit. And yet when I made this list, those smaller games didn't really pop up. So when you hear this list, I don't want you to think that I don't like small box games. I actually really, really like them. And I also really like games with solo variants, although I don't think any of those showed up on the list this time. So also, just a little bit of clarification for those who might be wondering how I made the list. I decided to use PubMeeple's ranking engine, which has become very popular over the last couple of years. It's a way to upload your collection onto their website, and then they'll show you 2 different games at a time and just make you pick, which one of these 2 do you prefer? And it's an easier way for me to begin to organize my thoughts about which games I like and why. So I use that ranking engine to make this list, and I was a little bit surprised by the results as well. So let's go ahead and get started with those. My number 10 favorite solo game is Newsfjord, which is a game from Uwe Rosenberg about running a little fishing village. You're trying to get the help of the village elders to go out and collect fish and other resources in order to build buildings on your board and sort of expand your little fishing village empire. It's basically just a normal Euro game with a light fishing theme on it. And what I really like about this game is that it takes some of the elements of my favorite Uwe games and combines them into one Frankenstein thing. So you have the immigration mechanic from A Feast for Odin, which I really like. You have a really simple worker placement mechanism that is very reminiscent of many of Uwe's older titles. And all of this is compacted then into an experience that takes maybe an hour to play, has lots of variability in the cards that come up. I wish there was a little bit more variability with the Elder cards, which are a very powerful way to distinguish one play session from the next. And you don't get to use all of the Elder cards in the solo game. So I wish that was a little bit different. And I wish that there were more interesting in-game goals. This is basically just a beat your own score type of solo variant. But overall, I really like this one. I think this is my favorite Uwe Rosenberg title at this point. And the fact that it comes in at this list at number 10 is not saying that I don't care for Euro games or I don't care for Uwe games. Actually, I would say that Uwe is one of my favorite designers at this point. But it just happened to be a little bit lower than the other games because I like him a little bit more. So that's number 10, Newsfjord. If you haven't already, I wouldn't say go out and buy it, but I would say at least give it a look. Check out one of the walkthroughs. For me, the goodness of it overcomes sort of the simplicity of its in-game goals. My number 9 favorite game is Terraforming Mars. Now, Terraforming Mars we talked about just a few episodes ago, so if you want to hear my full thoughts on that game and why I like it so much, you can check it out there. But in a nutshell, the answer is it just makes you feel like you're doing so much in one play session. I mean, it's hard, right? It's grueling hard. Those first few turns are really slow, and it takes a while to get your engine cranking. But once you have had a few turns under your belt, suddenly you're getting huge incomes, and you're able to do many different things on your turn in a way that makes you feel like you're actually building something. Like you might actually be terraforming and colonizing Mars. It's great. The production of the game is definitely a mixed bag and could use some improvement. And I would not be surprised if one of these days we see a really nice deluxe second edition of this come out. But for now, the gameplay totally overrides those problems for me. It's an excellent Euro game that deserves all the hype that it's gotten over the last few years. And it's one that provides a very different experience for solo gamers. I mean, the core mechanics are still there from the normal game, but if you want to play this multiplayer and solo, I feel like you get two different experiences out of it that still feel like they're held together by a common thread, which I really like. This is one that I could see rising for me over the next couple of years because the newest expansion for this, Prelude, it seems like will fix some of my problems with the game. One of my issues with it is that it takes just a little bit too long to get going for me. I want to feel like I'm doing more those first couple of turns, and the Prelude expansion sets you up for that. And I would like the playtime to be just a little bit shorter. It's already pretty short. It's around an hour to play this game, but it sounds like that can be cut down even more with this expansion. So very much looking forward to checking that out, and you'll probably hear a little EXTRAsode about that in the future. But for now, my number 9 is Terraforming Mars. My number 8 is Robinson Crusoe, Adventures on the Cursed Island. This is a game that I've had since, I think, 2012, and I really, really love it. It's a hard game to categorize. It's a cooperative adventure game in one sense, but you're not just rolling buckets of dice like you often do in those sorts of games. This is a Euro at its heart, with a bit of a push your luck mechanic as well. So you're going to be trying to explore whatever island you happen to be on based on which scenario you pick. And there are several scenarios right in the base box that are very different from one another. So the game has a ton of replayability. And you're going to start exploring the island, looking for different resources to help make sure that you don't starve or die from an animal attack or something like that. And trying to deal with all those pressures of just surviving on an island. And then also you have some other goal you're trying to meet. And the goals for each scenario are just so radically different. I mean, in one, you're trying to collect enough wood to build a fire so that somebody can find you on the island. On another, you're trying to film a King Kong film on this cursed island. Another one, you're trying to exorcise some kind of ghost that lives there. I mean, each one is so different. I am amazed at the quality of the components that you get in the box and just how much replayability is in the core set. There's an expansion out for this where you can play as Charles Darwin's crew going out on an expedition, and that's great. That's a very cool theme, but I've never felt like I needed an expansion because there's just so much here, because each individual scenario is going to play out very differently from game to game as it is. So if you haven't yet, check out Robinson Crusoe. Portal Games has said that this is going to get an app companion sometime. And it was supposed to come out this past summer, so I'm not sure what happened to that, but it sounds like it would manage a lot of the work between turns, the upkeep between turns, that sort of bogs the game down a little bit. And I would love to see that come out because that would make it rise even more for me over the years. My number 7 is Mage Knight, the board game. I know for a lot of people this is going to be their number 1, and they just won't be able to comprehend why it's not higher for me. I just need to say right now, I love this game. This is another game that I've owned for years and I've played so many times, but it's a game that has a very difficult rule set. I mean, the pages of this rulebook are just packed with text, and that text is packed with exceptions, and it's a very difficult thing to wrap your mind around. But once you get going, this provides an experience really unlike any other. It uses a deck building mechanic to let you move your Mage Knight, which is sort of a battle wizard, around the board where you can conquer keeps and go and seek help from monasteries, or maybe burn down the monastery if you want. And the different things that you do throughout this land where you're exploring are going to raise and lower your reputation, which makes it easier or harder to recruit units to come and fight alongside you. And you have the ultimate goal then of going and conquering the cities of this land. It has more of an epic scope and feel than almost anything that I can think of. This is an excellent game. It's very long. It does take about 3 hours or more for me to get through one session of it, so I don't get to play it very often. This is a once or twice a year kind of game for me. But honestly, it's so good that I'm never getting this out of my collection. And the base game alone is outstanding. If you buy the expansions, they add way more content to this game than you'll probably ever play. Just get the base game, and you're going to have a great time for a long time. So if you haven't checked it out, Mage Knight deserves all the praise it gets, and that's why it's my number 7. My number 6 is a similar game in theme to Mage Knight, but it's one that I like just a little bit better, and the mechanics are really quite different, and that is the City of Kings from the City of Games. This is a game that we reviewed several episodes back that we just gave a glowing review to, and since then it's gotten some mixed reviews from other reviewers. Personally, I don't understand that. I think this is a really well put together game. The theme shines through. It has a great sense of progression as you're leveling up. Now, don't get me wrong, it's hard. And the theme is abstracted in some areas of the game in a way that feels just a little bit funny. But overall, the sense of going out with your hero to go and fight monsters and level up so that you can beat the scenario's goals, but also having these workers that you can send out to go and gather resources to take back to the city to build up your hero and prepare the city for whatever's coming. It's just a fantastic idea for a game. The components are gobsmackingly gorgeous. I mean, a fantastic production of this game. Everything in here is highly replayable. I just really like it a lot. So if you haven't checked out the City of Kings, it's a little bit harder to get a hold of right now. There was an original Kickstarter that got you the main copy of the game. And there's been a second Kickstarter that does a reprint and adds a couple of small expansions. But I expect we'll see it in stock sometime in the next 6 months to a year. So keep your eyes open for that one. It's a very, very good game if you get a chance to play it. The City of Kings. My number 5 is Role Player. Role Player is a game that we reviewed a couple episodes back, and you can go and listen to that episode if you want to hear all the reasons that I love this. But the main one is just that it feels different than anything else I've ever played. This is a dice drafting and placement game where you are creating an RPG character. Just like you would roll a character to play D&D or something like that, you're trying to place dice in this grid on your character sheet to create the kind of character your character is going to be, right? So if you're going to have a chaotic, evil paladin with a drunken history or something like that, you want to place the dice in a way that gives them the stats that make sense for that character and the moral alignment that makes sense for that character. It's such a mechanically driven game, and you can definitely see all the mechanics poking through, but it has a great theme on top of it too, and a quick playtime and a solo mode that just runs smooth as clockwork. And so outstanding experience, especially with the Monsters and Minions expansion. Thunderworks Games has done a tremendous job with this title. If you haven't checked out Role Player, you should definitely do so. My number 4 is Gloom Haven. And before you panic and wonder how on earth I didn't make this my number 1, I have to tell you, I really, really love Gloom Haven. It's so hard for me to make this list because I love all of these games so much. Gloom Haven, you've heard about it, guaranteed on other shows. There's no other game out there quite like it. It is a dungeon crawl that doesn't use dice. It has an interesting hand management mechanic where you're playing 2 cards every turn, the top half of one card and the bottom half of another card. And it just provides you with so many different possibilities, so many different ways to upgrade your character. And of course, there's the legacy element of the game where over time, your character is going to fulfill his life goals and he's going to retire. And you're going to need to bring out new heroes to go and continue the story of what's happening in and around the town of Gloom Haven, there is so much content in this box. Whatever you've heard, whatever you imagine, just double it, triple it. It is just so much bigger than you could imagine. And I've heard people talk about the price of this. It's too pricey. What could possibly be worth $120 or $140, whatever it's running for now. And it is pricey. I will definitely give you that. And not only that, when you buy this game, you also really need to buy an insert, at least in my opinion, because having an insert is going to convince you to play this game more often because it'll be easier to get out and set up. And setup for this game is a bear. But all that said, it's totally worth it in the end. This is an outstanding game that does everything that it sets out to do just incredibly well. And really the only reason this isn't higher on my list is because of how long it takes to set up and get ready, and really how long it takes to play. Each play session is going to be about 2 hours long, maybe more, at least for me, because you're handling the mental load of 2 different characters, which is very difficult to manage. And it just doesn't hit the table as often as I would like for that very reason. But when I get it out, I have a great time every time. I usually keep it set up and play a few games in a row, put it away, and then come back to it in a month or two. Outstanding game. If you haven't already, check it out. It's as good a solo experience as you've heard. And that is Gloom Haven. My number 3 game is Lazarus Origins from Chip Theory Games. Now, this is a game that doesn't get quite as much attention as many of these others, but it really is outstanding. Chip Theory Games is an interesting company because all of their games use poker chips as one of the primary components. And they're famous for Too Many Bones, their dice building RPG. But this one is more interesting to me because of the simple rule set, because of how much replayability is in the box, and just because of the structure of the solo mode. So we haven't reviewed this game yet, and I definitely plan to do a review of this in the future. But what makes this game interesting is it's sort of an arena-style gladiatorial combat game where every game you're going to be picking a set of units that you want to fight with one another. And each unit in the game has this unique power set, and you want to pick units that will complement one another in order to meet the goal for that game. And the goals for the game are structured in this really cool way where they have a list of 20 trials printed on a sheet in the box that are solo trials, and each one of them is harder than the last. And so you set up the board according to these specifications. You beat the trial for that turn, and if you win, you progress to the next. If you lose, you get one more chance. And then if you lose it again, maybe you slip down to the one before it or something like that. It's a really neat system, one that I find very engaging. It's hard to imagine how an arena-style gladiatorial combat game would work well without getting bogged down and managing the AI's turn, but this game manages to do it so well. I just really love it. If you haven't checked out Hoplomachus, there are several different games in this series. I find Origins to be the one that is satisfying for me. I looked at all of them, but Origins has small arenas that are quick and easy to set up. It has a smaller footprint on the table. It's cheaper. And honestly, I have no desire to go and get the other games as much as I love Origins, simply because I feel like there's plenty in this box to occupy my time. I really love it. If you haven't already, check out Hoplomachus Origins. My number 2 game is Acronym. If you've heard our recent episode on this, you know that I'm just head over heels for this game. I think this is one of the smartest solo designs I've ever seen from David Turczi. He has basically invented this whole new way of playing solitaire where you can roll a die to determine an AI's actions, but there's sort of a map of possible actions on a separate board next to your player board. So you can see what he might do next turn, but you never quite know until the die is rolled. It does such a good job of emulating what it's like to try to read a person across the table without also bogging you down and managing that system. Plus, the base game of Acronym is just great. The time travel theme where you're trying to gather resources and prepare humanity for this great cataclysm that is coming is a fascinating theme, one that I love a great deal, and there's so much replayability here in the box. Each different game, you're going to use a different path, which is sort of a player tribe, I guess, in this game, and a leader for that tribe. And There are 2 different leaders for each path, so there's a lot of different possibilities in this box for how you can start the game. And once you do start, the mechanics of the worker placement are very engaging. There's so much to think about, so much to crunch on, but the rules aren't oppressive, and it just gives me a sense that is totally different than any other game I've played. I think this is the best Euro game I've played in years. You should definitely check out Acronym if you haven't already. That's my number 2. And my number 1 solo game for 2018 is Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. I just keep playing this game. Rolling dice to resolve a test is not my sort of mechanic really at all. I get really tired of getting hosed by dice in games like this, and that does happen to me here. But it's just so much more than that in this game. This is the most atmospheric, thematic game I've ever played. I'm so over Cthulhu games. I'm so over dungeon crawls, and yet both of these things are present in this game, although you could make the argument that this isn't really a dungeon crawl, I suppose. It feels like one to me in some ways. But it just feels different here because it feels like you really are conducting an investigation. It's more than just go into the next room and combat the enemy there. The things that this game does are just innovative. They draw you in, and you will feel like an investigator trying to save the world. There are so many different scenarios available for this in the app. The app is one of the best I've ever seen in board games. Not one of. It is the best app I've seen in board games, period. And even though you only get 4 scenarios in the base box, which is a high price for what you're getting, there are lots of fan-made scenarios that you can find on Board Game Geek. You can also unlock new scenarios as like DLC for the game that are $4 or $5 for each one. And they're a great deal for that price, so I highly recommend it. That's my number 1 game, Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. All right, that's it for this year's edition of my top 10 solo games. I am going to try to set out to do this every year because I know this list is going to shift, and I know you all want to hear about what I'm enjoying right now and what Carter's enjoying. So we're going to revisit that next year with Carter, and we'll see how things have changed. But for now, these are the 10 games I'm loving on the most. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode and for supporting the show. We could not do what we do without you. If you haven't already, please go and follow us on Facebook, like our page there, follow us on Instagram. That way you can see what we're playing and see pictures of what we've got on the table at any given time and receive updates from us there. You can also send us an email if you have any comments or questions about the show that you'd like to share with us. You can email us at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, please go to iTunes and review the show, because the more reviews we get, the more people see the show, the more we can do with the show. So until next time, I'm Brandon Waite, and this is Solosaurus.